Welcome, everybody, to our third webinar in our series on building community vision and implementing strategic plans for districts and schools. Super excited to partner with CIE on this project and this webinar project. They do an amazing job working with schools and districts on building strategies that really involve co-design. So this third webinar is focused on what happens once you finish your strategic plan. Now, what do you do? So shifting from document to dynamic action. And today, we are joined by three great people. So I'm going to pass it off to Donnie after I introduce myself. So I'm Nate McLennan. I am a senior partner at Getting Smart, and Getting Smart does advisory and advocacy for the future of education. So Donnie Tran, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, please. Thank you. Nate, once again, so pleased to be here and so grateful for your partnership and that of Getting Smart. So my name is Donnie Tran. I'm a partner at the Center for Innovation and Education, where we try to create the next generation of policy in partnership with communities, students, and educators, and really ultimately to make our education systems more responsive to the communities in which they're embedded. And I'm so pleased to be joined today by Victor and Melanie, and I'll let Victor introduce himself first.
Thanks for having us back. It's great to be here. My name is Victor Prusek. I'm the Director of Engagement for the Burlington School District in Burlington, Vermont. We're a relatively small district nationally, but one of the largest in the state. We have around 3,400 students spread across 12 schools, pre-K through 12. And I've had the pleasure of working with Donnie and others from his team at CIE for over the last 4 years, helping us create and keep our strategic plan going and alive. And I'll pass it on to Melanie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Melanie McGee. I'm happy to be here. I'm the director of the Program Management Office for Bellevue School District in Bellevue, Washington. We've got about 18 to 19,000 students. We are a K-12 plus transition organization, and we have been working with CIE for the past couple of years to develop our strategic plan. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, everybody. And again, thank you for taking the time to be with us today and share your wisdom and thoughts with our viewers. So I wanted to start by just framing the big picture. And the big picture is we are trying to figure out systems in education where all learners thrive. And I think we're going to leave it at those three words, all learners thrive. And there's 4 different areas we think at Getting Smart, we talk about a lot about the areas that we need to focus on. One is, how do you create broader outcomes? And by that, we mean standards, which address core skills, but also these transferable and durable skills that are really important, like collaboration and communication, creativity, etc. So we need to make outcomes more broad. We need to create better learning experiences. We know that especially as students get older, engagement levels decrease, and we start losing students, their interest in school drops, etc. So we need to create learning experiences that better engage and lead to better outcomes. The third is we need to create stronger signals. So how do we take the learning experiences that students experience and put them into a format and document them in a way that both either higher ed or employers can see this is what a student can do, knows, and is like as an individual human. And then finally, how do we expand learning ecosystems? So it's not just the opportunities within a school district, but it's opportunities that are outside of the school district, because we know young people learn everywhere, but often we only count the things that are happening inside the district. So this is our aspirational vision of a new horizon for learning that will help all students thrive. Create broader outcomes, create better learning experiences, create stronger signals, and expand the learning ecosystem. So to do that, we put it in a frame, what we call the Learning Innovation Framework. And our hope is that with this framework, we're actually bringing a lot of players together, both in districts and intermediaries that work with districts who are doing great work in this area across the country and across the world. And they fall generally into the categories within this framework. And so the goal is to accelerate systems change initiatives and build partnerships and accelerate the learning through regional networks so that these models can meet this new horizon. So we start with observation and thinking about what do you notice, building community vision, which was our first webinar with CIE, building the outcomes, what do we expect all graduates know and are able to do? What does the learning model look like to achieve those outcomes? For whom the signals that the learners are giving off so that they can reach the job that they want or reach the higher education institution that they want, and then where the learning ecosystem has been expanded. And so from that, there's obviously observation and reflection going on along the way. And then always we actually encourage, how do we scale and share the things that we're learning in schools? And part of this webinar series is about thinking about scaling and sharing. We know that CIE does a great job of strategic planning and building community vision, and we want to make sure that gets shared out with districts so more districts are able to create great strategic plans. And so today's webinar, the third in the series, is really focused on the strategy piece. So the first one focused on building community vision, the second one focused on writing the strategy, and the third one is, what does it look like to actually implement this strategy and purpose so it doesn't just end up in a Google Doc or a Word doc somewhere or gathering dust on a wall or whatever the case may be. So excited to hear about how these two districts and how they worked with CIE and Donnie Tran and his team to create an actionable element to a strategy. So Donnie, I'm going to turn it back over to you and your team.
Thanks, Nate. We're excited to be here and excited to tackle this really important question. Is strategic planning the end of a process, or is it really just the beginning? And often, unfortunately, the signals, I love this idea of signals and what do we communicate to important actors all around us. The signals that we send about strategic planning sometimes actually communicates that it's the end of a process and there's really no more input or available space for the community to engage. Strategic plans, especially the way that we've described it in our previous couple of webinars, really represent an enormous investment in effort and a really deep and meaningful aspiration for the community. But the problem is that even with all of that intention, all of that effort, and all of the dreaming that went into painting the picture of what the strategic plan could and should do, so many plans, at least from the standpoint of many people who are close to children, close to families, become shelfware. It is in a binder that's on the shelf. I haven't really figured out an analogy to a Google Doc that is never opened, but I'll think about that a little bit more. But they end up just gathering dust. And so what we hope for this session is that we want to plan, or we want to think about a process by which your plan truly comes alive, continues to live, and actually builds momentum and trust with your community. Now, we think that a key element of being able to live in that idea of a plan that actually lives and is enacted and is visible and it builds momentum with the community is shifting from a compliance mode to a collective ownership mode. In the old model of the way that we've, traditionally led these sorts of processes, we really have thought about a compliance seen it through a compliance lens. Somebody in a room somewhere at a district office created a plan. It gets filtered into a series of top-down directives that really are about making sure that certain boxes can be checked so that we can report to the board that we're making progress, and that the stakeholders are just the recipients of these directives and these progress updates. What that ends up often creating is a cycle of low-key resistance, minimal buy-in, and the plan really becoming irrelevant to the lived experience of the educators that are actually supposed to be enacting it, the students who are supposed to be impacted by it, and the families and communities that are supposed to see progress. So in this new model, we think about the kind of key phrases here being collective and reciprocal. What we think about is we want to do this in a way that actually unlocks capacity in our communities. All of those people that I just mentioned, families, students, educators, community members, these are all people who have knowledge, skill, and ability that can help further the strategic plan's implementation. So we want to unlock that capacity. We want to build legitimacy and trust with all of those people. And we want to sustain this work over time and with the kinds of turnover that tend to happen in every sort of public system. And at the heart of this new model are these 4 habits: inclusion, empathy, co-creation, and reciprocity. Inclusion being where we intentionally are bringing diverse voices into roles of implementation. Empathy is understanding and responding to the needs and perspectives of those who have to carry out the plan every day and are impacted by it so that we can actually respond to the new information that's coming in. Co-creation is designing and adapting that implementation process alongside the community, not just having them be passive recipients of all of our new plans. And reciprocity is continuing to ensure that whatever it is that we're doing is actually being enacted in a way that generates mutual benefit and shares power as we follow through with implementation. Now, we're so thrilled here to be joined by two districts who are doing this work on the ground every day in partnership with their communities. And what I appreciate about both Victor and Melanie is that they are doing this work and they're incredibly honest and real about all of the challenges and all of the things that are going well versus not going well and where there's still areas for growth. If you want to hear a little bit more about that, Victor spoke really beautifully about the ongoing reporting to the community about progress in the last webinar. We just want to feature these two voices because they are real districts undergoing real transformation and doing this work. Bellevue has taken on the idea of empowering design teams and a steering committee to really engage in co-production during the implementation process. And I'm going to let Melanie speak a little bit more to that now. Thanks, Melanie.
Thanks, Donnie. So we are in year 2 of our strategic plan. And last year, we followed the process that Donnie and team outlined previously, brought together a coalition to co-design, came up with the problem statement and root causes that you've seen. And then this year, we pulled the coalition back together, added some new voices and members. And their charge was to take that strategic plan that the group developed last year and come up with what our 5-year goals and measures would be. So what can we actually hold ourselves accountable to? What are those measures? What are those metrics? And as Victor mentioned, those are really hard to come up with. And so we had, on one hand, a coalition working this past year to come up with those goals and measures. And on the other hand, we had a series of design teams. So the way that our strategic planning process works in the district, we have a 5-year strategic plan. We have annual plans that we do each year, and we have school improvement plans. And they're all sort of nested one underneath the other one. And we had our strategic plan last year. We needed an annual plan. And so we did the thing that you're not supposed to do, where a few of us went into a room to create that annual plan and came up with our best thinking and 20 initiatives that we wanted to tackle this year, all connected very nicely to one of those 3 commitments that we came up with. But there was not a ton of shared ownership. We got questions like, who came up with this? Where did this come from? Why are we doing these specific things? And we had to answer and say, it was us. We did it. We did it. We thought it was the best next step. And we know we still have to define our measures. So for those 20 initiatives, about 6 of them had design teams that we pulled together this year. And their charge was to go deeper in a particular area. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You saw on a previous slide where our priority areas were really centered around belong, learn, and lead. So we had some initiatives around developing a welcome center that would be connected to this idea of creating a sense of belonging, really helping new students, new families who are coming into the district be able to navigate our system better. And when we talk about a welcome center, yes, it's a physical space, but it's so much more than that. And it really embodies the experience that we want folks to have as they are coming into our district. So we had a design team that we pulled together this year to go deeper into defining what could that look like? What should it include? What different departments would need to be situated over there? What are the different needs that people in the community are going to have that would cause them to come into a welcome center? So that team worked very specifically in that area. The connection that team has to our big strategic plan coalition this year is then thinking about what are those 5-year measures and metrics that we're looking at. So we know belonging is important. We know what people want to feel and experience in the system when they're belonging. What should be our measures for that? And so we used some of the work that the Welcome Center team was doing to help us further define that. And that example carries through the additional design teams that we had as well. As I mentioned, there were several more, some that were connected to our belong priority, some that were connected to learn, some that were connected to lead. And they've been in the field, on the ground, doing work this year. And we have liaisons from each one of the design teams who also sit on our coalition so that we have that reciprocal feedback loop going on between the coalition and the design teams. And as we're nearing the end of this first year and coming to a place where we will have some strategic goals and measures to accompany our plan. I will say that the work that the design teams has done to really help us think through what those measures should be has been invaluable. Those are the people who are going to experience what it is we're doing. Those are the ones who we're going to ask, to what extent are we making good on these commitments? And so having their voice and having their input along the way has been instrumental in helping us further our plan. And I will say it's not been a perfect process. I was sharing with Donnie, our district this year is going through some financial challenges, some pretty deep financial challenges. And so we bit off a lot with our strategic plan in terms of what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go. And it's very real for people to say, but given our current context and climate, is it realistic to think that all of these things can still be priorities? And how are you going to cull it to the most important, highest impact? Again, just having those different voices has been really helpful. I remember one of the things that Donnie and CIE would tell us last year, and it was how the work is the work. And I always think about that, the relationships that we're building and the conversations that we're having and the empathy that we're building for one another and being able to see different roles and different people who may at first blush appear to have competing interests. When they share their experiences and you get down to their needs and their feelings and you can connect with each other on a human level, it really does so much to bring us together as a community.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for the honest reflection about the opportunities and challenges from this year, how you've navigated them as the work has continued to emerge. So I love the connection that you just made there around how we work is the work. And it's a perfect lead-in to this other aspect of this that we want to highlight. That when you implement your strategic plan, it's an opportunity to model and live into your values. So Nate did such a great job at the beginning of this talking about the systems that we want to make, a place where all learners can thrive. And if your district or your community has a vision for that, then your implementation of the strategic plan is an opportunity to model it. So if you value student agency, then where are the opportunities to co-create with students as you're implementing the plan? If you have a value around diverse perspectives, then how might you include more perspectives at every stage of the follow-through? If you value community and connection, then how do you lead with empathy and model the building of reciprocal relationships with people in your community as you're implementing? Do you value collaborative problem solving and you want to model that for young people? Then how can you co-create in order to navigate the challenges that inevitably come up when you're implementing complex strategies and plans? So when you follow through in a way that mirrors your district's learner-centered values, it reinforces them system-wide. It shows that you're walking the walk. It shows your school leaders that this plan is not just a checklist, it's a way of working. It models to your students and your families that the way in which you want them to learn is the way in which you are going to operate. And we think that this alignment, it creates a culture where everyone can experience the kind of inclusive dynamic learning that we're trying to spur everywhere. And it helps us to create a system that ultimately is able to learn and adapt. What we think comes out of that is increased legitimacy, because the plan is seen as something that isn't talking out of both sides of your mouth, where you're saying one thing and doing something else. It's authentic because the implementation mirrors the way in which you want to work, which when you take advantage of that legitimacy and build on that legitimacy, it deepens the trust that you have with your community because you're practicing ongoing responsiveness, empathy through the way in which you are following through with your plan. And because you're activating more of your community, more of your school district leadership, more of your students, you're actually building a culture of agency, which you'd think would maybe increase some level of people going off and doing their own thing. But it actually means that people are taking initiative in ways that if you can funnel that learning back into the system, the way that Melanie talked about and with their steering committee and coalition and the design teams, can actually really build people's sense that I am an actor and a meaningful part of implementing the strategic plan. And it makes the change more sustainable because the people who are enacting it aren't doing it because they're being told to. They're doing it because they're following a need and following a process that helps them take ownership over it.
Even going back into sort of an earlier part of our discussion here, I sort of think of the strategic plan traditionally for us, I know sat on the shelf, 100%. The Google Doc that was never opened and wasn't even admired, honestly. And what I have seen happen, it's almost like a living organism now, because what the Guiding Coalition came up with 4 years ago, there's been evolution of that over time as things change. So that's one thing I sort of want to talk about. The other piece is this slide that's up here right now. I think about the term symmetry. So I met Donnie actually through a group of educators from across North America who I'm connected to. Our district is connected to the Deeper Learning Districts. Used to be called Deeper Learning Dozen. It's based out of Harvard's Graduate School of Education. And the term symmetry is something that we've used in the beginning there. And so for us at least, and I wonder about this for Bellevue, this type of approach that we're talking about, a very inclusive approach, one that has deep levels of co-creation, is really what we want to see happening at the classroom level. And so we are really trying hard to model that throughout the system. And so people can see that part, almost the habits of the strategic plan, living throughout the day-to-day workings of the districts and the way decisions are made. And that is what's going to make it sustainable over time. And I'm curious for us, we're in our year 4. So in about a year, we'll be thinking about the next iteration of our 5-year plan. I'm curious if that piece of it will just be a given moving forward. Will we need to really examine things like habits? Or will that just be the givens and we really need to think about just what are our main priorities going to be for the next 5 years?
Thank you so much, Victor, for bringing up this idea of symmetry, right? It's like modeling and symmetry are ways in which we both change the ways that we work and also show others how they could also be a part of this process in a way that's aligned to it.
If I may, I just want to be really honest and transparent that this is hard work. It's hard to change old practices. And it has been so valuable to have partners like you to work with along the way to help continue to push us forward. It's easy to fall back to what we know. And we found ourselves even doing it this year, where we thought we were doing the group a favor and taking some things that they had talked about and, taking it into the back room to summarize it and bring it back to them to let them react. And they called us on it. They said, no, this isn't it. This isn't what we talked about. This isn't reflecting it. And they were right. And we needed to hear that. So I just want to acknowledge that it is hard to change. It's hard to change practice. We know that. We hear that from our educators all the time. They go to training and they learn new ways of working and new practices, and yet to try to implement it, it can be a whole different story. So I just want to appreciate and value having strong partners to walk alongside with us in this journey. We have truly valued that. A couple of other things that just stand out as I'm thinking about this slide in particular around the legitimacy and the deepening trust, the culture of agency. We have seen our students become so active and so involved through these design teams that we've done and through the coalition. They are leading so much of this work on their own, organizing meetings outside of their school day, outside of our meeting hours, so that they're bringing things back together for other folks in the room to look at and respond to. It's just really been incredible to watch. And yes, it's exactly what we want them to do in the classroom too. So I think that's a really key point. We even talk about it as we're trying to come up with our measures for We Lead. And we're saying, why are we sitting in a room really talking about this? I mean, the kids told us they want to be agents of change in their lives. And how would we know? Well, we would have more opportunities, and it wouldn't just be opportunities. It would be people really helping us stretch maybe outside of our comfort zone as kids to take something on that we might not have thought about doing. The final thing that I'll say is thinking about doing a process in this way. We recognized early on that we wanted to do something different with how we design the strategic plan. And we wanted to continue to do something different in how we came up with the measures. And yet there's been a very real tension that we've been grappling with around, but what do we do with some of those traditional measures? We feel a moral imperative to ensure that our students graduate proficient in math and literacy. And yet we don't want those to be the only things that we're looking at. And so we've landed on this idea of continuing to use a measurement blend where, yes, we have some quantitative data that we want to review and look at. We also want to look at qualitative. We also want to continue to go out and talk to people and better understand how they're experiencing the system. What are their feelings? What are their needs? What is the experience of one person here? Different artifacts. And so thinking through different ways of knowing how we're doing on those commitments has been incredible, really, truly. And I look forward to the next stage.
Thank you, Melanie and Victor, for illustrating an incredibly important point here. Is that, and you just said it, we're in uncharted territory. And I would say that we are all in uncharted territory. Education is undergoing tectonic, seismic shifts. And one of the traps that we think leaders can fall into is the trap of needing to be seen as having all the answers and to have the plan. And we just got to do the plan, as opposed to acknowledging that situations are changing, new information is coming in, creating structures and systems for that, and displaying the kind of vulnerability that both Melanie and Victor have just spoken so eloquently about, that sometimes we just don't know, or we made a mistake and now we've got to pivot, and bringing more people into that as opposed to walling them off and keeping them on the outside. It's what builds trust is for people to feel like they're on your team. And I think Melanie and Victor and Bellevue and Burlington, respectively, have really done an incredible job of really expanding the tent and building trust with their communities through the implementation of their strategic plans. So to close out, we just want to recap that implementation is where you are really trying to deliver on the promise of your plan, and that you want to shift from compliance and top-down mandates to co-implementation and co-creation with a broad variety of users. And that you want to align your follow-through process with the values that your organization holds, especially as it relates to being learner-centered and community-centered. And that this approach, we believe, really is an approach that builds trust, legitimacy, and the culture of agency that we really do want to see suffused through all of our learning experiences, as Victor mentioned. Now, as we are closing out this part, we just want to offer up a couple of points of reflection. Like, who can be your co-implementers for the initiatives that you're taking on now? And what's one way to make your current follow-through more reciprocal and more inclusive with the community that you're meant to serve? Thank you for engaging in these questions. Thank you to Melanie and Victor for bringing their on-the-ground, deep expertise and experience to this conversation as well.
Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Victor. I really appreciate your time and insights. Super valuable for, I'm sure, those who are watching this. My takeaways are this: we want all students to thrive. It is the goal for us. We need a strong community vision. We need a strong strategy, and we need to be able to implement that strategy well. And it needs to be co-created and highly agentic. So with that, we hope that from these 3 webinars, you will have the incentive, motivation, and interest to reach out to either us at CIE at contact@leadingwithlearning.org or Getting Smart at jessica@gettingsmart.com to ask questions, look for ideas, look for resources. We're all here to help support you on your journey. So thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing from you.